Have you ever noticed how your dog can sense your emotions? Maybe it happened when you had a rough day. You come back home exhausted and down, and your dog greets you in a way that feels like he knows you're not okay. He wants to make you feel better. Or it's the opposite. You're euphoric, the energy is high, and he gets as happy as you are, bouncing around the room. Most people who live with a dog understand that dogs can sense our emotions. But the deeper question is how? How does that actually work? The answer is straightforward, but it depends on which emotion you're talking about. Each one travels into your dog through a different channel, and there's a specific study behind each one. Let's start with fear, because this is the one most people have heard about usually as dogs can smell fear. It sounds like folklore, but it's actually true. In 2018, a researcher in Italy named Biagio Daniello at the University of Naples Federico II published a study in the journal Animal Cognition. The problem he was trying to solve is that you can't really test whether dogs detect fear if the fearful person is in the room with the dog, because the dog could be reading the person's face, posture, breathing, or voice. So Daniello stripped all of that out and isolated just the smell. He recruited male volunteers and had them watch either a fear-inducing video, a happy one, or no video at all. While they watched, sterile pads were taped under their armpits to collect sweat. The volunteers were on a strict protocol for 2 days before donation. No smoking, no alcohol, no strong-smelling food, no scented soap or deodorant, so the sweat would be as clean a signal as possible. Then those samples were placed in a dispenser in a test room. The dogs, golden retrievers and labradors, were brought into the room with their owner sitting in one place and a stranger sitting in another. The dispenser released the odor, and researchers measured the dog's behavior and heart rate. The dogs exposed to the fear sweat showed measurably higher heart rates. They were more stressed, and they sought proximity to their owners. The dogs exposed to the happy sweat were calmer overall and more willing to interact with the stranger. The control group with no sweat fell roughly in between. What this tells you is that the fear response was triggered by the chemical alone. The dogs had no visual or auditory information about a frightened person. The signal was entirely olfactory, and it was strong enough to shift the dog's heart rate. So when people say dogs can smell fear, what they actually mean is that fear changes the chemistry of your sweat, and your dog's olfactory system picks up that change without you knowing you've released anything. Sadness, it's different. It works through a different channel. In 2012, Deborah Custance and Jennifer Mayer at Goldsmiths, University of London, published a study in animal cognition using a method adapted from infant psychology research. They brought in 18 pet dogs of various breeds and ages and exposed each dog to 4 different 20-second situations in randomized order. In each one, either the dog's owner or a complete stranger would do one of 3 things: pretend to cry, hum in an unusual way, or have a normal conversation. The humming was the clever part. It was deliberately designed to be novel and slightly weird, the kind of thing a dog would probably find interesting, just because it's unusual. The researchers wanted to rule out the possibility that the dogs were approaching the crying person simply because crying is a strange sound. 15 of the 18 dogs approached the person who was crying. Only 6 approached during the humming. None reacted to the talking. That alone tells you the crying wasn't just registering as weird noise, because if it were, the humming should have pulled at least as much attention. But the deeper finding was in how the dogs approached. Observers blind to the experimental conditions categorized their approach behavior into 4 types: alert, playful, calm, or submissive. 13 of the 15 dogs who approached the crying person did so submissively: tucked tails, lowered heads, slow movements, nuzzling. That's not the body language of a curious dog. That's the body language of a dog responding to distress. And the dogs approached whoever was crying with no preference for owner over stranger. If they were experiencing their own distress and seeking comfort, the prediction would be that they go to their familiar person, but they didn't. They went to the source of the crying, regardless of who it was. Custance and Mayer were careful in their interpretation. They didn't claim this proves dogs feel empathy the way humans do. The more conservative reading is what they called emotional contagion, coupled with a learning history. The dogs catch some piece of the distress, and they've learned over time that approaching distressed humans tends to be reinforced. Either way, what they're responding to is the emotional category itself, not just the person showing it. The third piece is what dogs actually read on your face. In 2015, Müller and Ludwig Huber and their team at the Clever Dog Lab at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna published a study in Current Biology called "Dogs Can Discriminate Emotional Expressions of Human Faces." The challenge in this kind of research is always the same. How do you know the dog is reading the emotion and not just some surface feature? A smile shows teeth. An angry face often shows teeth too. A dog could learn to discriminate the two without understanding either. Müller and Huber's solution was to split the face in half. The dogs were trained on a touchscreen to choose between photos of the same person showing either a happy or an angry expression, but each dog only ever saw half of the face during training. One group saw only upper halves. Another group saw only lower halves, so the upper half dogs were learning to read emotion from the eyes and brow alone, and the lower half dogs from the mouth and jaw alone. After the dogs reached criterion, the researchers tested them in conditions they hadn't seen before: new faces and opposite halves. The dogs performed above chance in every single one. That generalization is the finding that matters. It means the dogs weren't memorizing specific images, and they weren't relying on a single feature like a mouth shape. A dog trained on the upper half of a face could correctly identify the same emotion when shown only the lower half of a face it had never seen. The only thing that carried over was the emotional category itself. The dogs had built a real concept of happy human face and angry human face. So, what is your dog actually picking up? Put the 3 studies together and a fuller picture comes out. A dog uses different senses to understand how to read you. They will white them differently depending on what you are feeling. Fear is mostly chemical. It leaks into your sweat, and your dog's olfactory system catches it before you've shown any sign of it on the outside. Sadness is mostly behavioral. They recognize the patterns of crying as a category and respond with what looks like comfort behavior, regardless of who is crying. Anger and happiness are mostly visual. They read it on your face, in pieces small enough that even half a face is enough to go on, and they assign a positive or negative value to what they see. If this changed how you think about what your dog is picking up from you, subscribe to Dog Lunar so you don't miss our next video, and tell us in the comments, what's the emotion your dog reads best? Some dogs lock onto sadness, some onto stress, some onto excitement. We're curious what people see.